we took about it, any non-tactical object was handmade. So a jumper, a shirt, every thread would have been hand threaded, would have been hand woven, and it could take a year's manual labor. It would be worth £5,000 in today's money. So if you found something, you were rich. I found my lost object in Oxford JSOC in 1995. I was visiting two friends who were studying maths, PhDs, and I was already working at that point. Lucy was the head of Oxford JSOC, and I went up to visit them for Tikkun Leil Shavuot, and I remember this was Lucy's recounting the story. There was a particular Chabad rabbi in Oxford at the time who had promised to come for Tikkun Leil and give all the shirim. And about 2 hours before Yom Tov came in, he called Lucy and said, "I'm sorry, I've been asked to speak in London, and I'm not going to be there." So she asked last minute her close friends to each prepare 1 hour slots for the 6 slots during the evening before davening. And she was petrified that they wouldn't have enough material and that the discussion would finish after about 10, 15 minutes. And then everyone would go home and that would be the end of it. Apparently, she said, I turned up and at the end of the 15, 20 minutes of material, I asked a load of questions and that kept me going on until the Ben and Jerry at the end of each slot. And then we kept on going through the night. And I remember my friends organized a game of bridge and Lucy and I played against the two of them. And I came back after 2 days. I went to London. I visited my grandmother. I said, I've met the girl I'm going to marry. She went off to Japan for a year because she studied Japanese. She came back. We started going out. 6 months later, we were engaged. And 6 months later, we were married when she graduated from university. And she was my lost object. And she changed my life in an instant. Maya was my firstborn, and as any parent knows, the firstborn changes your life in an instant. You're a couple, and then suddenly, in an instant, you're a parent, and you're taking this thing home, and you have no idea. There's no instruction manual that comes with it, and your life changes in an instant. And Rena, the last conversation I had with her a week before the tragedy, she said to me, "Daddy, why are you not doing more for Am Yisrael?" And that was Rena's sort of way, and that's changed my life. Given what's happened, it's resounds in my head. So, to quote Rabbi Akiva, Havdil, if I hadn't experienced my life changing instance, one second, a scorpion. So a scorpion, I was in Kibbutz Orpan when I was 17, on Bal Teshuvah, and I decided to go to Kibbutz Orpan because I wanted to meet Jewish people and in my year out before university. And I went up to Ramat HaShofet, and I was working, I remember one morning in the fields, 5 o'clock in the morning, we were picking weeds from the cotton fields. And the kibbutznik said, if you're stung by a black scorpion, he said, immediately tell me and I'll take you to the hospital. He said, if you're stung by a yellow scorpion, he said, count to 3. If you're alive at 3, you probably weren't stung. So that was a scorpion is the most deadly thing that you could have in the time of the Gemara. And the modern equivalent of a scorpion is 2 Hamas terrorists with 2 Kalashnikovs and 20 bullets, and your life changes in an instant. So to quote from Rabbi Akiva, Havdil, if I hadn't experienced my life change instantaneously with a found object, and I hadn't experienced my life change instantaneously with a scorpion, I wouldn't believe that that the world could change instantaneously with Mashiach. But having experienced those 2, I now believe that also Mashiach had come in an instant. And I'd like to suggest to you that Mashiach came in an instant on the 7th of October. And why do I say that? Because a lot of people say about the Israeli people, we're resilient. Okay, what is resilience? Resilience if you study physics, is you just take a spring and you squash the spring inwards and you let go. If it springs out to 100% of its length, it goes back to exactly the same length, it's called 100% resilient. If it goes back to 80% of its length, it doesn't spring back, it's 80% resilience. Resilience is a measure of how much it can spring back to its original state after it's been squashed. I believe that the Jewish people are not resilient. Resilience doesn't do us justice. In fact, the Jewish people are likened to an olive. Why are we likened to an olive? Because when you crush an olive, you get olive oil, which is something much more valuable. And I think that resilience is not sufficient. If I had sprung back to what I was doing before the tragedy, every minute of my life subsequently would be a constant memory, reminder of what I was lacking. Because my life was so entwined with Lucy and the kids. And by changing everything, hopefully for the better, I have created something which I feel is greater than I was before. And I think that's true for all of Am Yisrael, Jews and Israelis who are going through this experience, that actually, if we just spring back to what we were on the 6th of October, in fact, at Efrat, we have stickers everywhere saying, we will not return to the 6th of October. It's not sufficient to go back to where we were. We have to go to a much higher place. Baruch Hashem, I think we're looking at what's happening. Am Yisrael has inspired us, is our role. The Americans to vote in Trump. He's choosing a lot of wonderful people to be the new ambassadors and secretaries of state, defense ministers who all support Israel finishing the job with Iran. And Douglas Murray was on yesterday, probably all saw him saying, if we cut the head off the snake, we have an opportunity now to make peace in the whole Middle East and transform the Middle, which I think is the pshat. It's a simple understanding of what's going on. This is a transformative war and will transform the Middle East and thereby transform the world. So what we actually need is not resilience, but we need something greater, which is what I call hope. There's no coincidence that our national anthem is Hatikva. That is what drives us, is the fact that we have a dream of a better future. The reason that we invest so much in our kids as Jewish parents is because we believe they should have a better future than we have. And that's the whole sort of basis of Torah, and learning and accumulating knowledge over generations, because every generation should have access to everything that was available to us plus more. The Jewish people remain the most literate people in the world, and the number of books published per capita is highest in Israel than anywhere else in the world. So we're constantly creating and regenerating information because we want this cumulative database of knowledge to be passed down. By the way, Lucy and I spent a year traveling around the world when we were first married. And we spent a few days in Alice Springs in Australia, when we worked in Australia for 6 months. And we visited some Aborigines. And the Aborigines told us proudly that their culture was not to give information to their children, but to let the children learn all for themselves. And that was how they built their culture. We then went in Sydney to the National Museum, and there's an exhibit of waxwork of Aborigines with Stone Age implements, spears, dressed in leather garments, standing like cavemen. And underneath it was dated 1946. That in 1946, there were still Aborigines walking around in loincloths with Stone Age implements because of this culture. And I said to Lucy at the time, I remember, I said, their culture is the exact opposite to ours. We believe in teaching everything plus and giving our children the best start in life, and they the opposite. And we're building Iron Dome, and they were building Stone Age implements. I think it says everything about about the Jewish culture. So what does this mean about the current situation? The current situation after October the 7th. October the 7th was the worst tragedy that has happened to the Jewish people in our lifetimes. And I would go first to say that it was actually on a level with the Holocaust, and I'll explain to you in what respect. Obviously, in numbers, not. In terms of violence, possibly yes. But in one dimension, it was even worse than the Holocaust, in the sense that during the Holocaust, the nations of the world pretended not to know what was going on. And when it was finished, they discovered that 6 million Jews had been massacred. They pretended to be sad. The fact was they knew everything in every detail and they did nothing to stop it. And in fact, the British turned back boats from Palestine, knowing that they were sending them to instant death in the Nazi death camps, but that's another story. During this particular attack on 7th October, not only was it broadcast live, but people were already dancing and singing around the world, celebrating it in real time. And I don't think we have seen, as Jewish people, anything quite that dramatic and quite that awful in our history that people have been so publicly celebrating our downfall, and for that reason, I think this really goes in the top three of sort of Jewish atrocities. And in a strange way, this should give us hope. But why should this give us hope? Because, again, going back to Rabbi Akiva was the man who experienced one of the greatest tragedies in Jewish history. He lost 24,000 students in 7 weeks, probably to the Bar Kokhba revolt, where his students were soldiers fighting. And he lost, in a very short period of time, all his students, all his friends, most of his family, everything he'd lived for 24 years, his whole life's work. And he had every right to go into depression and disappear from the world. And yet he did. He picks himself up. Some people say on Lag BaOmer, which is why we celebrate the 33rd day of the Omer. He picked 5 new students, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Yochai, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir. He taught them from scratch to be the greatest rabbis of the generation. They wrote the Mishnah. Because of that, we have the Gemara. Because of that, we have every single Jewish book in your homes and in every shul, every Beit Midrash in the world. And because Rabbi Akiva was able to pick himself up and start again, this was really the refreshing of the Jewish culture, Jewish religion, and the Jewish belief. And the question is, how did he do it? And the answer is he had hope. But how did he? And by the way, Rabbi Saksat used to say that there's a difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is believing that things will get better. Hope is doing something to make them better. So Rabbi Akiva had hope. And what gave him hope? Number one, I think he looks into the Torah and he sees a story about a people who fall to the bottom of the pit. They're slaves in Egypt, and any moment they're going to be idol worshippers, at which point there is no way out. They are absolutely trapped and forever will be the lowest of humanity. But just before that last moment occurs, Hashem picks them up, takes them. 7 weeks later, they find themselves in Har Sinai, collecting the Torah. This is the height of human existence in the history of the world. The only time that God appears to a whole people in one go, this is the only time that Hashem basically appears to his creations and tells them who he is and hands us the Torah. So Rabbi Akiva understood that when the Jewish people are in a tragic situation, that is the moment of the greatest possibility, of greatest gula, of greatest redemption. And another thing, from my personal experience, on Tish B'Av, after our tragedy, 3 months after our tragedy, I was invited by Channel 13 television to speak on their morning program. Now, I didn't know that there was a morning program on Tish B'Av in Israel. Lucy threw our television out when Maya was born 20 years earlier. And anyway, I turned up and I discovered that there's an interesting Israeli sport, which is to invite the saddest people in the state, in the country, onto national TV on Tish B'Av, the saddest day, to ask them one question, which is, how are you feeling? So they asked me, Rabbi D, how are you feeling? And I said, I'm feeling happy and sad. So they said, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm sad about the past, but I'm very hopeful about the future. And they said, why? So I said, well, I didn't understand why Tish B'Av, the day when 2 temples were destroyed, the saddest day in the calendar. This morning I didn't put on my tefillin, which is like Chol HaMoed. I didn't say Tachanun, which is like Chol HaMoed. And in Eicha, Midah Eicha, he refers to the day as Moed, as Chol HaMoed. Why the 3 things that remind me of happiness and festivals on the saddest day of the year? I said, now I can tell you. I said, because if you're the saddest person in the country and something's happened to you that's so tragic that you can't talk about it, you can't describe it, you can't think about it. I said, you're the person who knows for sure that tomorrow will be a better day. I said, I know I will never have a day as bad as the 7th of April, so that every day is a good day. I said, other people I meet are hovering around this level of happiness. And, if they miss the breakfast, they're already down here. And if something happens up here, but they feel sad, but they don't realize that they're really operating at 80, 90% satisfaction. I said, when you've been at zero, I said, every day is a plus. And so I think Rabbi Akiva understood that, having been through the worst tragedy that anyone could possibly go through, that nothing Romans could threaten him with could actually take anything away. And even though they threatened his life and eventually took his life, nothing compared to what he'd already been through. So he was full of hope and was able to carry on no matter what. So I think the Jewish people work with hope. And I think that Hashem promises us effectively after every tragedy that there is reason to hope. And after this particular tragedy on 7th of October, there's no exception. In fact, I think that the message was loud and clear. And the reason is that, number one, it happened on Simchat Torah, the day we opened the Torah fresh and read from the creation of the world. And Hashem was saying, you are now in a new world. We in Israel feel that every day that we're living in a completely new existence. I think you probably feel in England that life has changed for you. Jews all over the world feel this way. And by the way, non-Jews also feel this way. Anyone who watched the elections in America and France and England and everywhere, everything seems to be changing dramatically around us in 2024. And this is a blessing, because when our tragedy struck, I turned to my kids after the Shloshim and I said, we're starting a new world. We were in world number one with 2 parents and 5 kids. We're now in world number 2 with 1 parent and 3 kids. We had 30 days of pain and suffering and tears, but we're starting afresh, and it's going to be a happy world, a good world, with memories of world number 1, but completely separate, and there's no connection, and that's how we have to understand it. And Baruch Hashem, that helped us. And when the war broke out 6 months later to the day, people said to me, how do you feel after, now? Does it bring back all those memories? And I said, you know what, actually, I feel like we're in world number 3. So we're now another world away from where we started off. We're now joining the pain of Am Yisrael, and we're not connected as much to the first world we lived in. We're already so distant. So I think that Hashem is creating that awareness. And the first 2 words that Hashem says in the Torah are by Hior, let there be light. And we know that that's not the light of the sun, because the sun's created on day 4. So what is the light of day 1? I think it's the light of truth, the light that differentiates between good and evil. And that's why Hashem says every day, Ki tov me'od, because the light is shining, differentiating between what is good in the world, what is bad. And Hashem is seeing that and describing that. And the Sunday morning after October the 7th, we woke up, people were marching down the streets of London, New York, and Paris, screaming, kill the Jews. And Baruch Hashem. Why do I say Baruch Hashem? Pure evil was on display. And this is a good thing, because not one anti-Semite was created on the 7th of October. Every anti-Semite that exists today in the world existed on the 6th of October, but we couldn't see them. The fact that we can see them is a blessing, because we know now, that we have to do something about it. And the people around us, the non-Jewish people, know that it exists. And when it's hidden, it doesn't help us anyway whatsoever. So this is a blessing. But there are other things that were revealed on the 7th of October. And these were miracles. These were truth. And truth was made aware to us in a way that we've never seen before in our lifetimes, and maybe in the history of mankind. We saw tremendous miracles. A couple of months after the tragedy, a politician stood up in the Turkish parliament. He cursed Israel for 2 minutes and then dropped dead of a heart attack on the spot. And anyone who's seen that, you look it up on YouTube. It's really quite remarkable. But what's remarkable is this never happened in the past. I never saw it in my life. My parents never saw anything in their life. My grandparents in their life. And if you look on Google, it never happened in the past. Such a thing. So this is not normal. Okay, we're living in a new existence. We saw the president and we saw the foreign minister of Iran drop out the sky in what they described as an act of God. We might describe as an act of Mossad. But in any case, it's not happened before in the history of mankind that the 2 leaders of a nation fighting any other nation have just dropped out the sky in a miraculous way like that. And you can look on Google, maybe in the Tanakh, and you're probably greater experts on Tanakh than I am, these type of things happen. So we're back to sort of Tanakh times in these activities. We saw the pager situation, which was another miracle. And as I say to people, I said, it's not a technological miracle because the technology has been around for many years. The miracle was that Israel planned in advance. That Israelis, as I said to my kids, have no plan A, the best plan B on the universe. Israelis operate from the hip and they react to things brilliantly, but they don't plan anything in advance. And this was planned 2 or 3 years earlier, which is a miracle that Israel actually thought about something beforehand. By the way, I have a neighbor who's got a nephew who's in the Air Force. He said to me that his nephew told him that if you think that what Israel did to Hezbollah was impressive, he said, wait and see what we have planned for Iran. So apparently it's 10 times more impressive, but we'll have to wait probably until Trump comes in before we're able to operate it. So watch this space. So we're in incredible times. We've seen tremendous miracles and things that we didn't expect to see. I mean, and many stories about soldiers on the front. There's my favorite story about soldiers, but everyone has his different miracle story about soldiers. Was towards the beginning of the war, there was a tank that stopped for lunch in Gaza. And the 5 guys get out, and one of them, in Israel, they tend to smoke the tuna by sticking a tissue in the oil of the tuna and then setting fire to it. Then it smokes it for 10 minutes, and then they eat it. So he does this, and his friend says, what are you doing? He says, we've got live ammunition here. You can't light a fire. So he says, you're right. So he picks it up, throws it into the bush next to them. There's a massive explosion. They all duck for cover, and 4 Hamas terrorists come out with white flag because they're waiting to pounce and to kill them. So I discovered this because one of the shirim I was listening to, the rabbi said that he was in shul in Israel, and one of the soldiers made a bench gomel, and he asked him why he was bench gomel. This was the story. So these things are happening all the time. So it's tremendous. I think that we've never seen a giloi shechina, right, a revelation of Hashem's presence as we do now. And for that reason, I say that the world that we're living in before the 7th of October was the world of Galut, and the world that we're living in now is the world of Geulah, is the world of Mashiach. And I don't apologize for sounding extreme, because these are the words of Shmuel in the Gemara and the Rambam, who takes it as psak halacha in Mishnah Torah, which is that there will be no difference between this world and the Messianic era, except for one thing, which is Shibud Balchiot, which translates to Israel will not be under existential threat from her enemies. And if you were to ask any Israeli in Tel Aviv, Haifa, Netanya today, what is the purpose of this war? They will agree that it's to get rid of the existential threat of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. That, by definition, according to the Rambam, is definition of the Messianic war. That is no less than the war that we're in at the moment. When Douglas Murray says, by knocking the head off Iran, which is very easy at this point because they have no defense, we will be transforming the Middle East, that is saying we are bringing Messianic era. Okay, so that is where we are. I think it's basically indisputable. I think that makes it very exciting times for us to be living in this generation. But the question for us should be, what is our duty in that situation? So I think that in order to answer a question of that magnitude, we need to look into the Torah. And the Torah has an answer for us. In the Torah, as you know, there are 2 tochachas. Right? There are 2 lists of punishments that will happen to rich people if we don't keep the mitzvot. There's one Bechukotai, and there's one in Parshat Kitavo. And the difference is that in Bechukotai, it's pretty short, and it's followed by a positive sort of parak afterwards. In Kitavo, it's much, much longer list of punishments we'll get, and there's nothing positive at the end of it. So that leads the Ramban to explain that in Bechukotai, the Tochacha is referring to the first exile, meaning that took place between the first and second Bati Mikdash, which was 70 years. It was a shortish period of time, and it was finished by building the second temple. But the second Tochacha, which is in Kitavo, is referring to the second exile, which is 2,000 years, so it's much, much longer, and it doesn't end rapidly in something so positive. Why can we learn from that? Because the next parsha after Kitavo is Parshat Nitzavim, and the 4th Aliyah is what's called the Parsha of Teshuvah. And the Parsha Teshuvah, the word shav, which means to return, appears 7 times. That's why it's called the Parsha Teshuvah. And this seems to be the mitzvah that is connected to the end of the 2,000-year exile, which we are now at this particular moment now. And the word Teshuvah is mentioned in 2 contexts. It's mentioned at the beginning in V'shavta l'Hashem Elokecha, ad Hashem Elokecha. So you should return to Tshuva, to come back to Hashem. And the second context of those in the 7 words, one of the context that's used is that Hashem will return you from all the nations of the world, meaning Aliyah. So the word Tshuva, which means return, is used in 2 contexts. One is Aliyah, and the other one is returning to Hashem. And the question we might have is, why would it be that that should be the mitzvah, and why should it be in those 2 contexts? So I think it's fascinating to notice that we are at a turning point in Jewish history. How many Jews are there in the world?
13.
So 13, 14, 15. We don't know. Okay, but to say max, 15 million, high estimate. How many Jews are there in Israel, according to the census that took place just before this Rosh Hashanah? Every year they release it just before Rosh Hashanah. How many Jews in Israel according to that census? 7.6. 7.6. Now, you don't have to be a mathematician to work out that we've just passed the halfway point. It could be, in my opinion, we passed it on the 7th of October, and that's what triggered this whole thing. And Hashem was said, he wanted us to plaster posters all around the world saying, bring them home. And that is the meaning of this current situation. Hashem wanted Am Yisrael to plaster on the walls of all of Chutz La'aretz, bring them home. That is the message. Shav, that all the people have to come back. Why are these 2 messages of tshuva mentioned in this parsha? And I think it's clear because Torah understands that at the point at which this happens at the end of the 2,000 years, we'll be at this tipping point where 50% of Jews are outside of Israel and 50% of Jews are in Israel. And for those who are outside of Israel, the mitzvah of tshuva is to come home. And for those who are in Israel, the mitzvah of tshuva is to return to Hashem. And obviously those who come back have to then join and also return to Hashem. So I want to say a couple of things about Aliyah, which I think are relevant, and then maybe we'll move on to the second mitzvah, which when you make Aliyah in the next few weeks, you'll be on that trajectory as well. As far as Aliyah is concerned, I had a conversation with a very senior member of the British Jewish community recently, and I said to him, in a particular sort of leadership position, I said to him, you don't know whether England is now in 1930 or 1939. And therefore, you as a leader of the Jewish community should be encouraging Aliyah, and that people should set up Aliyah committees in all the shuls in England, and people should start talking and thinking about what their plan would be, because you don't want to be like the leadership of the Jewish people in Poland and Hungary and other places in Europe in 1939, who said, don't worry, everything's okay, and they weren't. And then basically it's all on you because you did nothing. To which he got very angry and threw me out of his office. But I didn't, after following that, I thought to myself, I didn't give him a third option. And I think the third option is more accurate. What if we're in 1944? Let me explain. After the war in 1948, there were 12 million Jews in the world. Okay? About 2 of them ultimately made Aliyah, and today there are 7.6, so that number grew by about 300, 400%. Now, that left 10 million in the diaspora in 1948. The world population of 1948 till today grew by 3 times, okay, from 2.5 billion to 7.5 billion, which means that the Jewish population should have at least grown by 300%, should be today 30 million Jews in the diaspora. There are not, there are a maximum 7. We lost 23 million Jews in the 76 years outside of Israel. 23 million, that's 4 Holocausts we have lost. So we're not in 1930, and we're not in 1939, we are in 1944 at the end of the Holocaust, okay? And the last survivors are yourselves. And this is the opportunity to come, 1945, 1948, to come back home. So I think that is an astounding number. I think it's something we should think about. And that's on the sort of negative side. On the positive side, I'll give you another little story. I had some yeshiva boys from Eretz Asfi staying with me a few weeks ago for Shabbat, and 3 of them from England. And I said to them on Friday night, I said, who of you can make Aliyah? So one of them said, my parents are Israeli, I'm probably going to stay here after the course. Yeah, I am. The other 2 said, no, we're going to go back home and study accounting and go back to England. So I held off for the whole of Shabbat, which is very difficult for me. But then Motzei Shabbat, we davened at the bus stop minyan next to my house. And at the end of the davening, I said, I want to show you something. I took them across the road. And across the road, there's a big flagpole, Israeli flag, and there's a mosaic sign dedicated to Lucy, Maya, and Rena. And I said, I want to tell you the history of this. I said, at the Shiva for the girls, some 17-year-old boys from the community in a frat came to the house and said, Rabbi, we'd like to build a park in memory of the girls. We'll raise the money. We'll do the work. All we want is your blessing. And I said, of course, you have my blessing. And I saw the pole go up. I saw the sign go up. And I knew they were building something on the other side of the hill, but I didn't have the koach to go and to see it because I knew it would be very emotional for me. 6 months later, I get a knock on the door. One of the boys comes and says, Rabbi, we'd like to show you what we've done. So he took me across the road, over the hill. They paid for the council to drill a path across the whole mountainside. And they paved it, and they'd put in a wooden pergola. They built a wooden pergola from planks of wood. They had built picnic tables, chairs, tables, and they put in planted trees, put in a watering system, a lighting system, posts for the girls. They really had put in, it was 6 months' work for 20 boys in the neighborhood, and all their spare time. And I cried. And I cried because when we first went to Israel in 2004, for 4 years, I studied in Kollel. And then we came back for 6 years, 2008 to 2014. I was rabbi, Lucy was Rebbetzin in 2 communities here. And then we went back in 2014. But when we went to Israel to learn, we didn't intend to stay in Israel. We intended to spend our lives in England. And we fell in love with Israel. And if you'd have asked Lucy what she fell in love with about Israel, she would have told you she fell in love with the youth. Because we were astounded by the fact that these kids were doing national service. They were going to the army. They were all madrichim, madrichot. Every single youth in a frat goes to 10,000 kids in a frat. They all go to youth clubs, are the biggest Ezra and B'nai Kiva in the country. They're motivated. When they're not doing that, they're volunteering. My son just put up a couple of Sukkot before Sukkot with his friends. This is sort of normal activities for them in a frat. They are volunteering. I mean, my daughter's now in the Air Force, Tali. She's dedicating herself to that for 2 years. And Karen was in national service looking after kids from abused homes. My son Yehuda is 15. He's already started a course of AI for the intelligence, sponsored by Shmoni Matayim, the elite sort of technology group in Modi'in. And that's going to be like 15 hours a week of his time for the next 3 years. His friends are working out. He's working out to get into the elite groups in the army, the fighting units. And this is life for youth in Israel. And so just a different class. So I turned to these boys. I said to them, I said, it may be correct for you today, now, from your perspective, to go back and study accounting in England. I said, that might be the right thing for you now. Maybe yes, maybe no. I said, but if you take a different perspective, which is not thinking about the now, but thinking about 20 years' time, and where would you like your kids to grow up? Then you have to make a decision. I said, it's a very clear decision. If you want your kids to grow up like English kids, or you want your kids to grow up like these kids in Israel, I said, there's no choice. There's no question. This is where we're meant to be. And I talk to youth here in England. I say to them, that the Ramban famously said that any mitzvah that we do in England is only for practice. What does that mean? It means that you are the reserve team to Manchester United. You have got all the skills, Shabbat and Kashrut and Talmud Torah and everything you need, everything you've been taught, given by your parents, Chesed, and so forth. All these skills, they qualify you to be the top footballer in the country, but you never played a game. I said, the moment you come to Israel, I said, all that you've been given by your parents, all these skills suddenly come to action, and suddenly you're playing on the FA Cup final. And that is the truth of the way that we bring up our kids. Our kids are Israelis, believe it or not. And the person who taught that to me and convinced me completely about it was actually Rabbi Naftali Brower from Bournemouth. And about 15 years ago, there was the JFS case, if you remember, where the mother who was converted Mazorti wanted her son to go, and the Bet did in their wisdom decided to take him to court, spent £1 million, and went to this high court. And the high court in this country decided that he should have the right to go to the school because by definition, anyone can choose to be any religion. That was their ruling. If you wake up tomorrow morning and want to be a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Hindu, a Christian, any other religion, up to 1,000 religions, you can be that religion tomorrow morning without any barrier whatsoever. Said Rabbi Naftali Brow, he said, yes, so there's one exception. I said it's Jewish religion. He said, the Jewish religion, the test for being a Jew is much closer to a nationality test than a religion test. He said, if you wanted to wake up tomorrow and be a Swedish citizen, he said, you have two options. Either you have to have one Swedish parent, or you have to swear allegiance to the Swedish government in front of a court of probably 3 judges. So that's our conversion process. It's basically a nationality test. It is not a religion test. It's not a belief test. It's a question of nationality. So we are really the Israeli people in exile. We are not the Jewish religion. It's a misnomer. We transformed it to the Jewish religion because we lived in exile, and it was easier to take that for 2,000 years. But now the reality is clear. We don't need to convince ourselves. We don't have to lie to ourselves. We are actually the Israeli people living in exile. Often people say, am I English? And I say to them, you know what? My 2 grandfathers came from Riga in the 1930s, and they didn't live their whole life in England. I said, my parents left England 20 years ago and now live in Switzerland. I said, they didn't live their whole life in England. And I said, I left 20 years ago to live in Israel. I've not lived my whole life in England. There's not one generation of my family that's lived the whole life in England. I said, I'm no more English than anyone, than any of you, in Israel. So I think we're passing through the famous story of the Chofetz Chaim, and the businessman, knocks on his door to visit him, and he looks at the Chofetz Chaim. He's got a very bare house with no furniture and so forth, and he says to him, "Where's your furniture?" And so the Chofetz Chaim says to the businessman, he says, "Where's yours?" He says, "Well, I said, I'm just traveling." So the Chofetz Chaim says, "I'm also just traveling." So I think we're all just traveling. Anyway, that's the Aliyah speech. So you can take it, you can leave it. For those of us in Eretz Israel, and probably for those of us outside of Eretz Israel, the mitzvah of the generation is actually tshuva. Also Aliyah, but also tshuva. Now, what is tshuva? So I read a book about 20 years ago by Rabbi Mark Angel called "Losing the Rat Race and Winning at Life." And in this book, he says a beautiful idea. He says that every one of us has 2 voices inside us, kol neshama v'kol acharim, like the voice of the soul and the voice of other people. So he says your kol neshama is broadcasting to you every moment who you are. What is your personal tafkid, your purpose, your role in the world? But the voice of other people are your friends, your parents, your children, your social media, the newspapers. Everything is telling you who you should be. And he said that the secret to success in life is to listen to your voice and not to listen to other people's voice. That was his message, and it spoke very strongly to me at a time when I was working in the city and etc. And I was happy to lose the rat race. But what's the relevance of that? I think that we all start off trying to be ourselves, right? As kids, we don't have any other inputs, right? Small kids, we know who we are, we know what we want to do. And then over time, we get the teenagers, we start wanting to follow the crowd and do what's acceptable to them. And it's much easier to do what other people want, because if you fail, then basically nobody can blame you because you did what they were doing, and it's much lower risk. So our natural inclination, our Yetzer Hara, tells us to follow other people, and we need to constantly drag ourselves back to our purpose. So dragging ourselves back, returning to our purpose, that is tshuva. It's basically rediscovering our personal task. In this world, everyone has a particular task that's right for them, and it's doing your particular task and not somebody else's. And I can guarantee that when you get to Olam Haba, not that I got there yet, but I can see this is correct. You will not regret if you did your task. You'll regret that you didn't do it. That's the only thing I'll regret, is that when you're shown the 2 videos of what you did and what you could have done, the gap is going to be what's going to sort of really get us. So the question is, how do we know what's the essential voice? What's the true voice inside? So I think that Hashem has given us some tools. He's given us one tool which tells us, which is like a signal that we are following the essential voice of our soul. In other words, if I wake up today or I decide to go back to sleep and sleep in all day, that's probably not the genuine voice of my soul speaking. It's probably my Yetzer Hara. So how do I know what is the genuine voice of my soul? So I think one of the tricks is to recognize simcha. things that give us simcha, which is extended, sustainable joy, are things which is when we're following the voice of our soul. How do I know this? Because Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch points out a beautiful idea. He says that the words for sustainable happiness, and we're not talking about just laughing or joking or being rude about people and having a sort of laugh at someone's expense. These are not sustainable happiness. But the word for sustainable happiness, this means things that give us long-term happiness, are all connected to growth. Simcha, sin mem chet. He said the root is connected to tzadi mem chet because the sin and tzadi are connected in the shoresh, in the roots of Hebrew words. So smicha, which is growth, and simcha are the same root. Sason, which is another word for sustainable joy. Sas is connected to tzitz, which means sprout. Gila, like gila, is another word for sustainable joy, and it comes from the same root as gil, which is age, which is about growth. So we see that the words for sustainable joy are connected to growth. Why is this? Because the natural outcome when we are growing along the axis of our kol neshama is that we will experience simcha. We'll experience this sustainable joy. If I go to shirim regularly and I constantly learn and grow my understanding of reality, this will give me simcha. If I grow my relationships with my spouse, my kids, my family, I see them growing, this gives me simcha. That's what we call smachot, because a simchat bat and a brit milah and a bar bat mitzvah and a chatuna, these are smachot because they are the growth in the family, in the relationship and the development of our family. If I grow in chesed and I constantly build on chesed week after week, this will give me simcha. So all these things are things that give us sustainable joy, and these give us an idea about that we're on the right track. In the converse to that, how do I know if I'm not following the right track? I have a deep feeling of kav, of pain. Okay, pain is a feeling that I'm not following the voice of my soul, that something is missing in my life. And I think pain, therefore, is a bracha. I wouldn't go as far to say that what causes the pain is a bracha, but even when we get to Olam Haba, we'll find out that it probably was. But that's difficult to say from this perspective. But once you've suffered something, the pain that you get from that is a bracha because that pain tells you to change and tells you something is missing. For example, I always give this example, but a few months ago, I had the first Shabbat in a year and a half without any of the kids home for Shabbat. So up until then, I'd had 1, 2, or 3 of the kids home. And then this one particular Shabbat, Tali was in the army, Karen was in Midrashah, Yehuda was in Shiva, and I was by myself. So I invited myself out to a couple of families for meals. And then Sudas Lishit, I intentionally left clear so I could come home and just sit by myself. I got home after Mincha and Shabbat, and I burst into tears. I was in tears for half an hour. And then I thought to myself, why am I crying? And it might sound obvious, but I don't normally do that. So I thought to myself, this is unusual. What is it that's making me particularly sad at this moment? And I thought, I know why, because it's the first time I'm by myself in Shabbat for 30 years. It's not the last time because my kids are growing up and they're going to be out more and more and more. And I don't want to be alone on Shabbat. So then I paused and I thought, well, how do I solve that? And I thought, well, maybe I need to get remarried. And that's what I thought about. Now, I thought to myself, there may not be a quick solution to this problem, but at least there is a solution. And suddenly I had a feeling of calm, and the pain went away. So the pain was there in order to give you, to give the motivation to do something. And then I thought to myself, I shouldn't be surprised, because what we say after we drink a cup of coffee, what's the bracha? B'rein hashot rabot, b'chesranal. Hashem creates many souls and what they lack. Now, why am I thanking Hashem for what I lack? I mean, it's a very odd thing to thank Hashem for what I lack. So you normally thank him for what he's given me. Because nothing in my life do I do unless I actually have a gap, unless I have a lack, unless I have a pain. I don't eat unless I'm hungry. I don't drink unless I'm thirsty. I don't work unless I feel that I would be poor and that would be a problem. And so anything that I do in life is because I have the lack. So the lack is what teaches me, and the pain is what teaches me that I need to change. I only have to know how to respond to it. So, for example, on Rosh Hashanah, my alarm clock, I've got to turn off on my phone, and 5:30 in the morning it goes off. And then I have 2 options. I can try and sleep through it, but I know it's just going to go on and on like a chronic pain and just annoy me, and just give me a headache. or I can jump out of bed, go to Ashkama, go to the Rabbi Shir, learn a bit of Torah, and I can make most of it. And the choice is mine. And that is life. You know, we can sit and we can wallow in our pain. And I meet people who do that, and many people, not many people actually, a lot of people do not, but some people, you know, suffer and they choose to suffer. And it's the Yetzer Hara that wants us to suffer. And I can tell you why, because I've experienced it. You know, it's very easy for me to allow a wave of pain to wash over me and to knock me out and to make me unavailable to go to davening, and unavailable to do my work, and unavailable to live, and unavailable to speak to people, and just to lock myself in my room. But it's the Yetzer Hara, because my Yetzer Tov wants to go out and do something positive, wants to daven, and wants to connect to Hashem. And if I give into it, then I'll just be washed out. I was actually visiting a community recently, and I'm staying with a couple. They both were psychologists, and they asked me. They said, "How do you deal with how do you deal with your tragedy?" And I said, strangely, I said, at the beginning, I used to feel like a wave of things would trigger me. I'd see a picture of the girls. Google Photos sends me memories, and which always triggers me. People say something, I meet the kids' friends, whatever. And then, I feel like a wave of sadness coming towards me. And at the beginning, it takes over and knocks you out. I said, but then after some point of time, maybe about after a year or so, I was able to start pushing away. I saw it coming. I just pushed it away. So they said, oh, that's interesting. I said, how do you do that? So I said, I'll tell you what. I said, podcasts. So they said, what? I said, podcasts. So I got a new car after the tragedy, and it came with Android Auto, which I never had before. So now I drive a lot in Israel because I speak a lot around the country. And I don't mind the journeys because I listen to Shirim while I'm in the car. And Android Auto on Spotify, and if you type in a few rabbis you like, it will offer you new options that you didn't even know existed. And it's like the algorithm works for you and starts sending you different rabbis and different Shirim that you never heard of. And so I'm constantly listening to really inspiring content the whole time. And I said to them, I said, that gives me simcha, right? Because that's giving me the growth in terms of my knowledge. I said, and that simcha is able to fight off the kav, the pain in this other aspect of my life. And even though they're not connected, I said, that is giving me the spiritual energy in order to fight that pain. And I said, as a rabbi, I used to talk like every other rabbi about Talmud Torah, mitzvot, chesed, and all the stuff that you expect around that. And I thought to myself, when I hear rabbis talking about it, I always think, well, they would talk about that because that's their job, and that's what they know what to talk about. So obviously. And then it struck me that actually there's a reason for it. In other words, it's not just that we talk about these things. Actually, these are the things that change your life. These are the things that make your life, A, very happy, and B, very livable, and give you the skills and the strength to deal with any challenge that you have. So when we do chesed, and when we do Talmud Torah, and when we do mitzvot, these are the things that actually really help us and really transform our lives. So I suddenly realized, like many things, that things I've been teaching for many years actually were true. So these are two things. I don't know, but we have a little bit of time. I'll give you 2 minutes. I'm going to go to the bathroom, then I'm going to come back and finish.
Okay, so in the, what do you call it? Oh, yeah, but this intermission. Okay, in the intermission, just in the middle, I just really think that it's probably the perfect place to actually just tell everybody, for those of you who haven't seen, it's been posted, but not necessarily advertised that widely. But tomorrow night is a perfect opportunity to take one of the lessons that Rabbi D is teaching us, not to sit at home and make your own colors and everything at home, but to come out together to be able to put all of our energy, all of our spiritual energy into our dough, and to elevate the world that's going to really take us into this next place. And just by simply being together, just coming together, everybody from every different walk of life, wherever we are, women together, to be able to bring the bracha that we also desperately need. Just as also a reminder, if anybody still wants to give a donation, you can send it to Seed and just put reference Rabbi D. And another very connected part of the Aliyah speech is that on Tuesday night, I have none other than a very dear friend who sells apartments in Israel. And she is going to be in our house. I'll send it out as well on Tuesday night. So just in preparation of, please feel free. Maybe we'll have to speak to Candace, but a bit of encouragement on the food side. But that will be. So there we go. I've just taken the rest of your Aliyah speech on selling apartments in our house on Tuesday.
Excellent. Excellent. So we're going to share an intermission. We're looking at. The question is, we talk about Shuvah. And the question is, when do we? It sounds odd to be talking about tshuva. We passed Rosh Hashanah before we finished that, so we don't need to talk about that anymore. Except that I'd like to point out that if we look at the Shemona Esrei, we say 3 times a day. I think there are 4 brachot that we say that relate to tshuva, and perhaps it's worth thinking about them. After the first 3 that basically describe our relationship with Hashem. The first 4 that come after that are Chonen Hadat, Roteb Tshuva, Slicha, and Geula. Okay, so if anyone's ever thought about why we say these things, I want to make the following suggestion. Our Tshuva is a 4-stage process. How do we start this process of Tshuva, go back to Kol Neshama? What is going to sort of wake us up? So I think the first thing is Chonen Hadat, that we have to have dat. We have to have understanding of what it is we need to change. What is dat? So the Baal Tanya explains, and I'll explain in my words what I think he's saying. There's Chochmah, Bina, and Dat, right? Wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. I like to compare it to a model of an amoeba. Anyone ever seen an amoeba under a microscope? It's like a single cell organism, like a bigger bacteria. And if you put a little bit of food in front of a little dot on the slide as you're watching it, you'll see the amoeba sort of starts to encompass itself around the food, and encircles it, and then the food's inside the amoeba, and then it breaks it down into little pieces, and then it disappears, and the amoeba grows as it absorbs the food into itself. And that's how amoeba grow, then it probably splits, whatever. So this is a bit like Chochmah, Bina, Dat, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Wisdom, chokhmah, is a piece of inspiration that comes from somebody else, from a shir, from a friend, from a book, sometimes from something, just inspiration in our brain, which is usually triggered by something that we've seen or heard. And it's like the food that's outside. It's outside of us. Then, Bina, understanding, is when we take that inspiration and we break it down into its components. We try and work out what it really is saying to us. But that is when we absorb it into ourselves. We expand our personality, expand our brains, because we've actually taken that knowledge, that inspiration, into our life, right? So the actual absorption of the chokhmah into ourselves is called dat, right? It's that close connection of that with the incorporation into one being. So the start of any process of tshuva is that we have to have inspiration from somewhere. So that's why I recommend listening to Shirim and the podcast I listen to all the time, giving tons of ideas in that context. So that's giving you the material that starts this process of tshuva, of self-change. Then you need Rotzev tshuva. Who needs the ratzon, the will to change? I need the will to change, right? We can thank Hashem for Ratzil Tshuva, but actually we're thanking him for the fact that he gives me the will to change, right? Where does the will to change? Where does that come from? So I think we've talked about this perhaps from the fact that I noticed that certain things give me simcha, so that might give me the will to change because I want to do more of that. Or perhaps because I've got a kev, I want to get rid of this pain, and so the will to change is actually the will to get rid of that pain. Or possibly it's just the fact that I say 3 times a day, maybe sometimes I actually think about what I'm saying, and maybe then I actually have the will to change, right? So somehow or other, I need the will to change. Now, I've got an idea that's come from somewhere. I know I want to change and I want to make it part of my life, but I still haven't done anything. Why do I not do anything? I really want to change. I know exactly what I need to change. What is the barrier to stopping me change? Anyone? Maybe?
Yourself?
Yourself? Okay, great. What, sorry? Comfort. Okay, anyone else? So? Yeah, Sahara. Perfect. All the above, all absolutely right. I like to put it as follows, and it's more true for men than for women, but it's true for women as well. We are scared of changing because if I change the way that I operate, I have to admit that what I did in the past was wrong. So it's the sphere of failure, it's ourselves, it's disparity, it's horror, it's all these different things, but it's basically the fear that if I start doing something differently, it means I have to admit to myself that what I did in the past wasn't right. And we can't admit, men particularly, that we were ever wrong. So we need to forgive. Who do we need to forgive? Ourselves. So that's what we say slicha, means I have to forgive myself. Now, I've got the idea. I have the will to change. I now have forgiven myself what I was in the past, and now I'm ready for Gula. What's Gula? Says the commentators that it's not referring to national Gula, to redemption, because it's in the individual section of the Amidah. It's talking to personal redemption, which means the freedom to be myself, the freedom to follow my tafkid, my kol neshama, to be myself. I've done teshuvah. So these four prayers, we can think of them as the process of teshuvah that we say every day. And this is the process we should be going through literally constantly through our lives. And these are the things that renew us and enable us to grow and to deal with change, because we should be constantly changing ourselves, constantly thinking about things in a new perspective. So in summary, we are in a new world. I think we're in a world of Gula, of Mashiach. We are a blessed generation, the generation that is suffering a lot of challenges. In fact, Rabbi Meir, I think in the Gemara says, I don't want to be in the generation before Mashiach because of the pain people have to go through, and I can identify with that. But on the other hand, if we have hope, hope is what will carry us through. And the mitzvah of our generation is the mitzvah of tshuva, both in terms of physical tshuva, avaliyah, but also in terms of tshuva to Kadosh Baruch Hu. As we said, the process of tshuva is the return to our kol neshama, to our personal, individual tafkid, whatever that is. We'll know what it is because it's the thing that gives us simcha. And the kev that we have in our lives is, our task is to remove that kev. And the removing of that kev is going to return us to our particular path. We do it every day and every moment. And the process is 4 stages. We need to be inspired by something. We need to want to change to that something, that idea that we had. We need to forgive ourselves for the reasons for not having done it in the past. And then we can actually find ourselves in a state of personal gula and personal freedom to do our tafkid, and then to actually release ourselves to our task and our essential purpose in the world. So that is what I want to say, and I'm very happy to take some questions. I think we have a few minutes with pleasure.
Any questions? Don't be shy. I know you're not all English. There are very few English people actually.
Well, you think of a question, I have to say, I had the great honor this morning. I was davening in Norris Lee, and at the end they announced and welcomed Rabbi Grossman from Migdal Emek, and he's apparently in England, obviously, and he was there, and he came up to me and we had a chat, and then he was driving off, and I ran over to him and I said, I just wanted to check with you, because I said, I saw a video of you. I just want to check it's true, because I had this memory 20 years ago. I think it was in yeshiva. Somebody showed me a video of Rabbi Grossman. Now, Rabbi Grossman is a Haredi with a black capote and a hat and big beard. And he set up a school, I think, in Migdal Emek, which takes non-religious kids who are really, I imagine, struggling, drugs, whatever, all different things, and he brings them back. And he has tremendous success rate. These people become amazing citizens and army officers, and and achieve amazing things. And it's all because of what he does. And 20 years ago, I saw a little YouTube video of him, and he was surrounded by all these non-religious kids around him, and his capote in the middle. And the interviewer went up to me and said, "Why are you? Why are you here? Why did you choose to be here?" And he answered as follows, and this was something that I told him that affected me completely my whole life. he said, I was standing in Meshurim one morning and I looked around and I thought, do they need another one of me here? And I answered to myself, no. So then I asked myself, where do they need me? And I thought this is such a beautiful answer because, you know, often when we think about our tafkid in life, right, we think, well, my skills are this, and I live here, and therefore I should be doing X, right? And I'm doing very well, and therefore I'll continue doing it, right? And that's a normal, natural way to sort of decide what we want to do in life. But what he was saying was something different. He said, if there's somebody who could replace me, then I don't need to be here. So where do I need to be? And this is something which, I mean, I've changed my job every couple of years. So I'm not such a great son-in-law, but you know, this was something that really inspired me because often when I was in a job and I was doing well and I was happy and whatever, I decided to myself, you know, could somebody else do this job just as well as me or better? And the answer was almost invariably yes. And then the question was, okay, so where should I be next? And then I moved on. And I think that served me personally, you know, from my soul perspective very well, but I suppose it depends on personality. But I think it's a question that we should ask ourselves sometimes. You know, it may be you have a great life in England. It may be that you perform a very important purpose here, but it may be that somebody else could plug that gap. And it may be that you have a purpose somewhere else. And that's a question that we should always be asking ourselves. And he was anyway. So he agreed that is what he said, which was a great relief because I remember my father telling me. My father told me he had Rabbi Unterman as a kid in I think Marble and he remembered going to his sermons, and he said that he did various sermons that he would tell me in the name of Rabbi Unterman. It was like one of them he said ABC of warfare, atomic warfare, biological warfare, and chemical warfare. And another thing he said was the new morality, this is 1960s, the new morality is the old immorality. Anyway, I had the honor of meeting Rabbi Unterman many years later. And I went up to him at a kiddush somewhere and I said, my father, you told me all these stories about you. And I said, you said these things. And he looked at me and said, I said that. So I was very glad that Rabbi Grossman agreed that he had said that.
I'll just tell you quickly, there's just a book written about Rabbi Grossman already now, called The Legend in our town. And the living legend. And so when somebody has a book written about them, well,
This might seem like a lack of emuna question. It's about the aliyah. How do you square the circle of thinking about living in a country where you are in more danger? Visiting Israel, I'm scared driving around.
So
don't have that fear living here.
I hear. So a couple of answers. Okay. Answer number one is that the spiritual danger here is 1,000 times greater than the spiritual danger there. So that's number one. So as far as your kids are concerned, and that your grandchildren will be concerned, if they're there, they're protected. And when we talk about pikuach nefesh, the rabbi said nefesh means your spirit. So the halacha is that if a kid is, God forbid, kidnapped by non-Jews on Shabbat, you can go and chase them and you get it back, because the concept that they might be brought up not as Jewish is pikuach nefesh, and that's what it really means, is protecting their souls. So number one, from your nefesh point of view, you're much safer there. Secondly, I don't want to talk about the dangers of living in England because I don't want to scare people, but we know who the enemy is. We have soldiers whose job it is to protect us. Occasionally they get it wrong, like on the 7th of October. Since then, thank God, they've got it right. And now we're going after them. And now most Israelis feel very protected by the army. And we knocked out most of the danger. This is not true here. And what we saw in Amsterdam, God forbid, could spread very rapidly and easily across the whole of Europe. And there's no control over these people. There's no will amongst the police to deal with it. There's no ability to stop them bringing weapons to start attacking Jews and shuls all over the world. I can tell you, when I was in Teaneck recently, I was sitting at the Shabbos table, and one of the guys had a gun, and he said to me, in shul today there were 6 people with guns, and a year ago there would have been none. And he said, when I went to the gun shop in Makipa, which is near Teaneck in New Jersey, he said there's a big Palestinian community that lives right nearby Teaneck. the gun shop owner said to me, "I'm glad you people are buying guns now because the other side already bought 100 times more." So this is what's happening in America. This is happening in Europe. For sure, these people have weapons in this country, and who knows? So that's one. So the feeling of safety you have here may not be that's realistic. I'll give you another statistic which slightly contradicts what I just said. Previous statistic, but I think it's also interesting. If you look at how many Jews were lost in the world in 1970, in the last 76 years, physically, about 35,000 Jews were lost, mostly soldiers and victims of terror in Israel in the last 76 years. That amounts to 1 per day for 76 years since the state of Israel has existed, mostly in Israel, few in Buenos Aires, other people, Paris, a vast majority in Israel, as you say. If you think before the state of Israel, 6 years, 1945, 3,000 Jews a day were massacred outside of Israel before Israel existed. If you say that's not a fair comparison, then go back 2,000 years to CE 70 when the Second Temple was destroyed. When the Second Temple was destroyed, there were 5 million Jews in the world, 10% of the Roman Empire. If that number had grown pro rata with the Chinese population until 1948, there would have been 200 million Jews in the world in 1948. There weren't, there were 12 million. That means that effectively we lost 188 million Jews over 2,000 years, which is on average 200 per day for 2,000 years. So before the modern state of Israel, we had a loss of 200 Jews per day, and now we have 1 per day. And if every Jew were to come back home, the trend is very clear, it would go down to 0. And, first of all, for spiritual reasons, but secondly, for very practical reasons, we are not able to continue the war in Lebanon because we don't have enough Milawimnikim and enough fighters, and they're exhausted. My neighbors' kids have been up there, and some of my neighbors for 200, 300 days fighting because some chunks of the population are fighting. But more important than those people in Israel not fighting, there's 100% of the Jews outside of Israel are not fighting. And if they were to come and they were to contribute and play and perform the mitzvah, the Torah mitzvah of Milchemet mitzvah, which is incumbent upon them, we could win this much quicker and much more efficiently with the help of every Jew performing their role in the world. I was in America recently and I had the honor of hearing Rabbi Herschel Schachter speaking, who's one of the heads of YU. And he was asked on a panel, what is the extent of Milchemet mitzvah, the mitzvah of a protective defensive war in Israel, in terms of who has to participate? And he turned to the audience and he said, every Jewish student in a university in America, Britain, and Europe has exactly the same compulsion to go and fight on the battlefront as any Israeli who's currently living in Israel. In fact, the fact that we live here and not there has no bearing whatsoever in terms of your chiyuv, your obligation as a Jew to participate in this war. When Jews tell me that they feel terrible at what's happening in Israel, again, it's a question of understanding the pain. I think we're very good, Yetzirah is very good at sort of misinterpreting pain when we don't want to understand it correctly. If you're feeling pain about what's happening in Israel, it's not because you feel for the people of Israel, okay? And you know that at the heart of your hearts. I mean, the first day of October the 7th, we all felt for the victims, and yes, that lasts for about a day or two. After that, the pain that you're feeling is a different pain. The pain you're feeling is that you're not there. We're not there. We're not able to be on the battlefront. We're not able to help them in the way. So we all do what we can. But the people who are doing the most are the people who are actually fighting on the front line, the people who are helping those people fighting on the front line. That is our duty. That is the mitzvah. It's a Torah mitzvah. The Mishnah says that a kala from Hachuppah and a chatan from his cheder, from the Beit Midrash, have to leave whatever they're doing and they have to go to the front line and they have to fight. So that is the mitzvah, and it's more than the mitzvah. It's a natural feeling that we want to be part of it. We want to help. We want to do what we can. And that's the pain we're feeling. And the moment we realize that the pain that we're feeling is not in sympathy and empathy and whatever, but actually a personal pain, because it's a kol neshama telling us we should not be here, we should be there. That's when we can actually do something. That's when we can get rid of that pain. I can tell you, and you know this is to be true, because when you go to Israel, that pain goes away. When you go to Israel, you feel pain, you feel fear, and you feel sad, you feel shocked, and you feel upset, and then when you hear what's going on in Israel, the moment you get there, you have this feeling of like calm, because you're there and you feel like I'm now doing what I need to be doing. That's why it goes away. It's like it's inexplicable, because surely that pain should be stronger when I'm there, and I should be much more worried and upset when I'm actually there. But it doesn't. It goes away when I'm in Israel, and when I'm here, I'm constantly feeling for Jewish people in suffering in Israel. But the moment I'm there, I'm part of it, and I feel energized by it. Somebody was asking me about depression in Israel. I know that there's a high amount of depression amongst youth in this country and certainly in America. I mean, in my community, because they're very much engaged in all this stuff, I think there's very low levels of depression because people are have a huge purpose. I mean, the kids already are immediately, they know what they want to do. Boys are giving up heads to yeshiva. It's doing a couple of years studying now. They're going straight to the army without doing the yeshiva beforehand because they want to be part of this war. Everyone knows what they need to do and they want to be part of it. So the pain that we're feeling is because we're not part of it. We're not there. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, I think everybody just needs to get to be part of it. Fines, and there will be 50 pounds less towards your aliyah. Make your aliyah envelopes now, girls. Thank you very much. And we've got an envelope here. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, Rabbi D. And Emir Sashem, we should just have good things from all of us. You give to me. Yeah. I'm your hand, yeah.